Hello, welcome to my channel and to my craft room. Today I am making alterations to items I found at thrift stores. And then I also have a couple of items that I made, but I don't really like how they turned out, so I need to tweak them just a little bit. So let's get started. First up, we have these purple pants and this striped top. The pants are much too long, so I'm going to be hemming them. So I turn up the hem and measure it and see if I like the length, and if I don't, then I will adjust from there. I will be taking off 5.5 inches for these pants. So I made this top, and it was sort of an experiment because I really like cowl neck tops, and I thought that this fabric would work really well for that. But I was wrong about that. So I stitched these sort of pleats to make it hang how I wanted, but it still didn't quite work. So I'm going to turn it into a V-neck. So we'll start with these pants. So I'm going to measure up 5.5 inches from the bottom, put a pin there, and then I'm going to figure out how wide I want the hem. It looks like the original hem was about 1.5 inches, and it was serged along the edge. So I'm going to mark down from that pin 1.5 inches, because that will be where I cut. But the lining is in the way, and it's attached at the bottom with these threads. So I snip the threads, get that out of the way, and measure and pin that again. So the amount of fabric that I will cut off for this hem is 3 inches. And I had planned to use my rotary cutter to cut this, but then I decided I would get a more precise cut if I mark with a pencil and then cut with scissors. Next, I measure and pin and mark and cut for the lining hem. The lining hem will be narrower than the outside hem, so I will actually cut off more fabric from the lining. So the amount of fabric I am taking off from the lining is 4.5 inches. So I've brought my pants over to the ironing board, and I'm going to measure and turn up and press 1/2 inch on the edge of the lining. And then I will turn up another 1/2 inch, and then we'll get this pressed and ready to stitch. And for the lining hem, I'm just doing a basic straight stitch, and here's how that looks when it's done. And since my serger is still broken, I'm going to have to do a double turned hem for this one as well. I'll just be using a different stitch. So I turn up 1/2 inch first, then another inch, and this fabric doesn't want to hold the fold as well as the lining fabric did. So I think I'm going to have to make a little modification to how I do this hem. So I'm going to bring it over to the machine here and just use a straight stitch to hold this first 1/2 inch folded, and then I'll turn up the other inch, and we're going to use an invisible hem stitch for this part. And hopefully I can explain this well. So you can see that I've got my hem folded up, and now I'm going to fold it back the opposite direction, leaving just a little bit of that edge sticking out past the fold, and then I'll pin that in place. Then I'll bring this over to the machine, and I'm going to set it on number 4, which is the stitch that I want. And then I will stitch this very slowly and carefully, because when it goes to the left there, I want it to just barely catch the very edge of that fold. And I'll show you what this looks like from each angle. So you can see here how those zigzag stitches have just caught the very edge of that fold. And then when I turn it right side out, you can barely see those stitches against the fabric. And here's what the inside looks like, and you can see how different the thread color is, but it really doesn't matter because you can barely see it. So then the last step for these pants is to open up these back pockets. A lot of times manufacturers will stitch them closed just so that the clothes look nice in the store, but most people don't realize that there actually are pockets, and so they don't open them up. And here's how the pants look when they're finished. The length is much better, and I can wear them with high heels or flats. Okay, let's move on to this striped top. You can see how the pleats are kind of stitched in place, and it really just doesn't work. So the first step is to pick out all those stitches, and here you can see how it looks now. It just did not want to hang right. So let's turn this into a V-neck. So I've cut off some of that extra fabric and folded and pressed to get the general shape that I want. But of course, since I made this a cowl neck, it's got this extra fabric along that neckline. So I'm going to gather that down, and I'm going to bind it like I did with the armholes. And I might add some gathering here in the center as well. So I really like how a bias bound edge looks, which is why I used it on the armholes. And I think that'll look really nice on the neckline as well. So I folded this in half down that center front seam, and I am just going to use my rotary cutter and ruler to try and get the general shape that I want. And I think I'll do some with my French curve here as well. I think that'll work. Next, I'll make the bias tape, and I am just cutting 2-inch strips at a 45-degree angle. And I just need 2 of these, and that will fold in half and get stitched to the neckline, and then I will fold it over and stitch it down. To gather the front edge, I do 2 lines of the longest stitch that my machine has available. Then I'm going to pull all these threads to the inside, and I will knot them together, and then I will use the other threads that are inside to pull up the gathering stitches. So this is all gathered and ready to have the bias tape stitched on. So I've used pins to mark how long this front part of the neckline needs to be, and so I will match up the center front and shoulder seam with those pins. So I actually pin this to the wrong side of the fabric because then I will turn it to the outside and stitch it down. That's how I did the binding for the armholes, and I want the front neckline to match. So as I stitch this on, I'm being very careful to not mess up any of those gathers. So I want to kind of smooth them out as I get to them. So I actually should have stitched this a little closer to the edge, but it's fine because I will just trim off that extra and then fold it over, and that'll look just fine. So now I'm going to stitch the little tiny seam for the center front. So I've got the 2 pieces of bias binding together, and I'm going to stitch at a 45-degree angle coming out from the center front seam. And you can kind of get an idea of how that's going to look. Now I'm going to use a very tiny, narrow zigzag stitch to stitch this down. And really the only reason I'm doing it this way is because that's what I did with the armholes, and I want it to match. So here's how that turned out. I think it looks a lot better than it did before. And I decided not to do the gathering at the center front seam because I don't think it needs it. And here it is with the purple pants again. I think the whole outfit looks a lot better. Moving on, I'm going to shorten this pencil skirt. I like my skirts to hit right at the knee, and this one's just a little bit long. So I'm going to pin it up and see how it looks. And I will be taking 3 inches off the bottom of this. So I start by separating the lining at the sides, and I'll use pins to mark the length that I want it to be and then how much I need to actually take off. And then we've got a problem here at the back slit because this is actually stitched together, so I need to separate the lining from the outer fabric in order to shorten it. Next we'll mark with my chalk pencil how much we need to cut off, and I'll do this to both the outer fabric and the lining separately. And I'll cut that off. This is sped up quite a bit because I want to make this nice and precise, and it took a few minutes. And then when I get to the back slit, I'm actually just going to cut upwards, and I'll get that all separated in a few minutes. Here's a close-up of what it looks like at the back slit, where the lining is stitched to the main fabric, and so I'm going to have to remove that stitching, and I'll just use a seam ripper for that. Now that that's done, I'm going to hem the lining first. So I will turn up a 1/2 inch and then another 1/2 inch, and then I will just use a simple straight stitch to hem that. Then I'm going to do a zigzag stitch along this edge of the main fabric, since my serger is still broken. And I realize I've mentioned my broken serger a couple of times. Projects just turn out so much nicer when I have the serger. The zigzag works in a pinch, but it really doesn't look as nice. And then I will press up 1.5 inches for the hem. And then we'll come over to the machine again and set it on the widest stitch and the longest stitch, and we'll set it on stitch number 4, and we'll hem this just the same way as we did the purple pants. And here's how that finished hem looks. Not bad. I think this length is much better on me. Since I'm only 5'1", I almost always have to hem my skirts and pants. Next, we have 3 pairs of black slacks of varying lengths, and I'm basically going to do the same exact process with each of them. This second pair has cuffs, which I don't like, so I won't be making it cuffed when I hem it. And this third pair is lined, so I will hem it exactly how I did the purple pants. And you've already seen this process a couple times now, so I'm going to speed up this footage. And here's the first pair, and the second. These are the ones that had cuffs. And here's the last pair. This is the pair that's lined. Moving on, I'm going to be taking in this gi top to fit me better. I actually made this for one of my daughters, but it turned out too short for her. She has a longer torso and longer arms than I do. So what I'm going to be doing is making these darts in the back longer. And the first step will be removing this top stitching next to the dart. Once I've done that, I can move on to actually fixing these darts. So I've marked with my chalk pencil, and you can see how much longer they will be. And then I just use a straight stitch along the line that I've marked, pivoting at the corner. And I tie the threads together at the ends so that they won't come undone. And then I just top stitch next to those darts, and this will be done. And here's how that looks now. It fits much nicer in the back, and it's just a lot more comfortable without all that extra fabric. The next garment I will be altering is this blazer. It fits pretty nice, except the sleeves are just a little bit too long. So I basically need to take off about 1 inch. So the first thing I have to do is take off these buttons, because some of them are in the way of where the hem will be. it was at this point that I realized that hemming a blazer is more complicated than hemming pants. So I was only going to take off the first couple of buttons, but then I realized I need to open up this whole area, which means I'm going to have to take off all the buttons, and I need to very carefully pick that all apart. Next, I have to separate the lining from the outer fabric all the way around the bottom of the sleeve. And once that's done, I have to figure out how to reproduce this mitered corner and this straight edge. And that's a little bit more complicated than I expected it to be. So here's how it looks now with the buttons off and the lining separated from the outer fabric. So I've got it marked with pins. These top pins are where the bottom edge will be, and then these lower pins are where I'm going to cut it. So it will look like this. It's actually more than an inch that I'm taking off. And I make the same marks on the lining. So the top pin is where it'll be folded, the bottom pin is where it will be cut. So I mark and cut the lining fabric and the main fabric the exact same way I did for the pants. So the bottom edge of the sleeves had this interfacing in them. So I have some fusible interfacing here, and I will cut strips to put in the new hem. I'll use my iron to fuse this interfacing to the inside of the sleeve, and I realized after the fact this would have been easier if I'd turned the sleeve inside out first. And I'll fold up and press the bottom edge. And once again, I do a zigzag along this edge, and I prepare to do the invisible hem just like I did on all the pants. But first, I need to do that mitered corner. So I stitch it at a 45-degree angle and then turn it right side out, and it looks like this. Then I do that other corner. So we have two very nice, neat corners at the bottom of our sleeve. Next, we do the invisible hem. And just like on all the other projects, that stitching is almost imperceptible. Next, we hem the lining of the sleeves. And this is just like all the rest of the projects, just a double-turned hem on the lining. Next, I stitch the lining to the main fabric, and I prefer to do this by hand. And here's how that new hem looks. Only thing I have left to do is sew the buttons back on. And here's the finished product. Not much of a difference, but just enough. Now I'm ready for job interviews. Moving on to the final project for this video, I have this lovely dress that is quite a bit too long. It does have a modesty panel in the back, but since I was lacing this up with no help, I decided to not worry about that right now. You can see here how much fabric I need to take off. So I'm just going to put a pin in place, take a look at it, and move the pin as needed to get it right at floor level. I'd say that's pretty good. Next, I put the dress on my dress form and mark the hem all the way around. At first, I tried marking it with chalk pencils, but then just decided to use pins instead. So you can see my outer layer of fabric is marked with pins, and then the lining. This dress actually has 2 linings, so I will be hemming it 3 times total. I will be using the narrow hem method, so I will do a line of stitching, which will then be a fold line, and then I will stitch as close to that fold as I can, and trim the excess, fold it over again, and stitch it again. So here's how it looks after I've done the first line of stitching, folded it, and then stitched close to the fold. So I have to cut off all of this extra fabric. I don't know if you can see it, but I've cut extremely close to that stitching line, and I'm going to do that all the way around. So now that's all cut off, and it's folded over, and we're going to do the final line of stitching. And here you can see how that looks on both the front and back side of the fabric. Nice, neat, little tiny hem. I did the 2 lining layers first because this thread doesn't match completely, so I needed to get a different thread for the outer fabric. So you can see this is the purple I've been using, and what I actually ended up getting was a brown because it was closer than any of the purples. So that's what I will use on the outer layer fabric. And I just used the same exact method that I did for the lining, but before I finished the hem, I put it on my dress form to make sure that I had the length exactly where I wanted it. And then I just finished the hem, same as the others. And just to show you what a slow, painstaking process this is, I've left this part at the actual speed. I have to be very careful to not cut through my stitching line or through the other side of the folded fabric. Okay, let's just speed this up a little bit now. And then here it is after the hem is finished. And here's how the dress looks. It's all hemmed, the length is perfect. Can't wait to wear it. So at this point I thought I was done, but then I decided I think I want to add some straps. So I don't want to be tugging on this all evening. So I cut rectangles of the outer fabric that I had cut off from the bottom of the skirt. Then I narrow hemmed the long edges and gathered the short edges. I also put some gathering in the middle, so these straps will be gathered where they meet the dress in front and back and at the top of the shoulders. And my straps are pinned in place. And I stitched them on very close to the edge. And here is the completed dress with the jewelry and shoes that I intend to wear. I also knitted a wrap to go with this. This is actually one of my earliest designs. I designed this back in 2010, I believe, and I've knitted it in a lace weight bamboo. Let me just grab my purse, and I am ready for my husband's college reunion.
Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you so much. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, please subscribe. And I'll see you next time.